They spent years trying to figure out your price tag. Boardrooms full of suits analyzing what makes you tick, what makes you fold, what makes you sell your soul for comfort. And then something shifted in their databases. Red flags, anomaly detected. You weren't playing the game they designed. You were rewriting the rules while they watched, confused, scrambling to recalibrate their algorithms because you became the variable they couldn't predict. Let me tell you what terrifies the architects of conformity more than rebellion. It's the person who simply refuses to be purchased. Not with money, not with approval, not with the illusion of safety. They can handle the loud protesters, the obvious disruptors, the ones who scream their defiance from rooftops. Those are predictable. What keeps them up at night is the quiet revolution happening inside someone who discovered their own worth isn't negotiable. You know that moment when you finally looked in the mirror and saw past the costume you'd been wearing, past the version of yourself that nodded along, played small, swallowed opinions like bitter pills just to keep the peace. That moment when the mask cracked and something fiercer looked back at you, that's when you became dangerous. Not dangerous like a weapon pointed outward. Dangerous like a truth that can't be silenced. Dangerous like someone who stopped auditioning for other people's approval and started directing their own story. Think about it. Your whole life, there's been this invisible auction happening. People bidding on pieces of your authenticity. Your family wanted you to be the safe version, the one who chose the stable career, married the appropriate person, never colored outside the lines they drew in kindergarten. Your friends wanted you to be the fun one, the reliable one, the one who never outgrew the person they met in high school. Society wanted you to be the compliant, one consume, comply, compete, repeat until you're too tired to question why. And for a while, maybe you sold yourself in installments. Little compromises that seemed harmless. Swallowed that comment that made your stomach turn. Stayed in that relationship 6 months past its expiration date. Kept working that job that felt like slow suffocation because the benefits were good, and what if you couldn't find better? Each compromise felt small, manageable, temporary, but small compromises have a way of compounding interest. One day you wake up and realize you're living someone else's blueprint, speaking someone else's words, chasing someone else's definition of arrival. You became a masterpiece of people-pleasing, and the scariest part? You got good at it. So good you almost forgot there was another version of you buried underneath. Almost. But here's where the story gets interesting. Here's where you stopped being predictable. Something inside you refused to die. Call it intuition. Call it your authentic self staging a coup. Call it that stubborn part of your DNA that remembers you descended from survivors, from people who crossed oceans and endured impossibilities to get you here. Whatever you call it, it started whispering when everyone else was shouting. It said, "This isn't it." It said, "You're bigger than this box they built for you." It said, "Remember who you were before they told you who to be." And that whisper, that quiet, persistent, undeniable whisper, that's what made you a threat. Because once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It's like seeing through a magic trick. Once you know how it works, the illusion loses its power. You started noticing the strings, the patterns, the ways you'd been conditioned to shrink, to defer, to apologize for taking up space. You noticed how they praised you most when you were convenient, how they called you difficult the moment you grew a backbone, how they labeled your boundaries as aggressive, and your standards as unrealistic, and your self-respect as arrogance, to make you retreat back into the comfortable coffin of compliance. But you did something they didn't expect. You stopped defending yourself and started defining yourself. You stopped explaining your choices to people who were never going to understand them. You stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. You stopped setting yourself on fire to keep people warm who wouldn't throw you a match if you were freezing. And that's when their entire system started glitching. See, the game is designed around leverage. They need you to need something from them. Validation, approval, acceptance, security. So they can use that need as a leash. The whole infrastructure of control depends on people believing they're not complete without external permission to exist fully. But what happens when someone realizes they don't need permission? What happens when someone discovers that the approval they've been chasing is a rigged carnival game, designed to keep them playing but never winning? What happens when someone decides their own validation is the only vote that counts? The system short circuits. You became the glitch in the matrix. The unexpected variable. The person who walked off the stage mid-performance because you realized the whole show was designed to keep you performing forever. Now, let me be clear about something. This isn't about becoming selfish or reckless or burning bridges just to watch them collapse. This isn't about rejecting every structure or relationship out of some misguided rebellion. This is about discernment. This is about knowing the difference between connections that elevate you and chains disguised as connections. Between standards that serve your growth and standards designed to keep you contained. Between solitude that renews you and isolation that diminishes you. This is about developing such a clear sense of self that you become unbribable. Not because you're stubborn, not because you're arrogant, but because you know exactly what you're worth and you refuse to accept anything less. And that knowing, that unshakable internal compass, that's what they can't buy, manipulate, or control. Let's talk about what this looks like in practice. Let's get specific about the moments where you chose yourself over their script. It looks like the moment you stopped chasing the career that impressed people at dinner parties and started building the life that actually fulfilled you when the lights went out. Maybe that meant taking a pay cut to do work that mattered. Maybe that meant starting over at an age when everyone said you should be settled. Maybe that meant admitting the dream you'd been chasing was actually someone else's dream that you'd inherited like furniture you never wanted. Remember that feeling? That knot in your chest when you first considered walking away from what you'd invested years building? The fear that whispered you were throwing away everything you'd worked for? The voices, internal and external, that told you to be grateful, to stop being ungrateful, to recognize how good you had it compared to others? You felt all of that, you heard all of that, and you moved anyway. It looks like the conversation where you finally said no, without the apology, without the explanation, without the 3-paragraph justification email. Just no, standing alone like a complete sentence, and watching people's faces when they realized you meant it. The confusion, the offense, the audacity they felt at your audacity, because they'd gotten used to a version of you that bent, that accommodated, that twisted yourself into whatever shape they needed to feel comfortable. And now, here you were, standing straight, taking up space, refusing to contort. It looks like deleting the numbers of people who only called when they needed something, unfollowing the accounts that made you feel inadequate, walking away from the table where you were the topic of conversation but never invited to speak. It looks like choosing discomfort over dishonesty, choosing growth over comfort, choosing your peace over their proximity. Every single one of those choices sent a signal that you couldn't be controlled through the usual channels, that the old leverage points no longer worked, that you'd somehow slipped through the cracks of the carefully constructed system designed to keep everyone in their assigned lanes. And here's what nobody tells you about becoming uncontrollable through traditional means. It's lonely at first. The people who love the old version of you, the manageable version, the predictable version, they don't know what to do with this iteration. Some of them will try to guilt you back into the box. You've changed, they'll say, and they won't mean it as a compliment. They'll weaponize your history, remind you of who you used to be, suggest that this new version is just a phase you'll grow out of. They'll bring up memories like evidence in a trial. Remember when you used to be fun? Remember when you weren't so serious? Remember when you didn't make everything so complicated? What they mean is, remember when you were easier to manage. Remember when you didn't ask questions. Remember when you accepted whatever crumbs we offered and called it a feast? Others will simply disappear. The relationships that were built on your compliance will crumble the moment you stop complying. The friendships that required you to play small will end the moment you expand. And you'll watch them go, sometimes with sadness, sometimes with relief, often with both. And that loneliness, that silence where familiar voices used to be, that's not emptiness, that's excavation. You're not losing people. You're revealing who was actually there versus who was there for what you provided. You're not becoming isolated, you're becoming selective. There's a difference between being alone and being surrounded by people who don't see you. That empty space you're feeling, that's actually room. Room for relationships built on mutual respect instead of mutual dependency. Room for people who celebrate your growth instead of resent it. Room for connections that add to your life instead of requiring you to subtract from yourself. But you have to be willing to sit in that emptiness long enough for the right people to find you. You have to resist the temptation to fill the void with the first warm body that shows up just because silence feels uncomfortable. And let me tell you that silence can be deafening, especially at 3 a.m. when doubt creeps in and you question whether you made the right choice, whether you gave up something real for something uncertain, whether you burned bridges you should have mended, whether your standards are too high and your patience too thin and your expectations unrealistic. Those moments will come. The wobbling, the second guessing, the late night bargaining with yourself about whether you could just go back to how things were. But here's what you need to understand. You can't go back. Not really. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you know. You can return to old situations, old relationships, old patterns, but you won't fit the same way. Because you're not the same person who left. You've tasted authenticity. You've felt what it's like to choose yourself. You've experienced the electricity of living aligned with your truth. And once you know that feeling, everything else tastes like cardboard. So you don't go back, you go forward. Even when forward feels like walking through fog. Even when you can't see 3 steps ahead. Even when every logical part of your brain is screaming that you're making a mistake. Because here's the truth. They don't want you to discover. You are enough. Right now. Not when you achieve more. Not when you shrink less. Not when you finally become whatever impossible standard is currently trending. You. Right now. With all your contradictions and complications and works in progress, you are enough. And the moment you truly believe that, not intellectually, not theoretically, but in the marrow of your bones, you become ungovernable. Not in a chaotic way, not in a destructive way, in a free way. Think about a river carving through stone. It doesn't do it through force. It doesn't do it through aggression. It doesn't wake up one morning and decide to destroy the canyon. It does it through persistent, relentless commitment to its own path. The stone is harder, stronger, more imposing. The stone has gravity and density and every physical advantage. But the river doesn't try to become stone. It doesn't apologize for being water. It just keeps flowing, following its nature, moving in the direction it was meant to move. And over centuries, over millennia, the landscape reshapes itself around that truth. The canyon wasn't there before the river. The river created it simply by refusing to be anything other than what it was. That's you. You're not trying to destroy the systems that tried to contain you. You're not waging war against everyone who misunderstood you. You're simply committed to flowing in your own direction, and over time, everything that was supposed to limit you starts to reveal its impermanence. The job that was supposed to be your ceiling becomes a stepping stone. The relationship that was supposed to define you becomes a chapter. The fear that was supposed to paralyze you becomes fuel. The failure that was supposed to end you becomes foundation. But this transformation requires something most people aren't willing to give. Unwavering commitment to your own evolution, even when it costs you everything familiar. Even when it means disappointing people whose opinion you used to organize your life around. Even when it means facing uncertainty without a safety net. Even when it means being misunderstood by everyone except the person looking back at you from the mirror. Let me paint you a picture of what this actually looks like on a random Tuesday afternoon. You're sitting in a meeting and someone says something that 6 months ago would have made you bite your tongue. But now you feel your spine straighten. You feel the words forming before you consciously decide to speak them. And you do. You speak up, not aggressively, not apologetically, just clearly, honestly, with the calm certainty of someone who's decided their voice matters as much as anyone else's in the room. The silence that follows feels like it lasts forever. You can feel eyes on you, some surprised, some impressed, some annoyed. You can feel your heart pounding, that familiar anxiety that comes with breaking pattern. But underneath there's something solid, something that wasn't there before, self-respect. Or you're at a family gathering and someone makes that comment they always make. The one that used to make you laugh uncomfortably and change the subject. The casual dig disguised as a joke. The comparison to your sibling. The question about why you're still single, still childless, still pursuing that thing they don't understand. And instead of deflecting, instead of shrinking, you pause. You look them in the eye. And you say, calmly, kindly but firmly, I'm not doing this anymore. You don't elaborate. You don't justify. You just draw the line and wait to see if they'll respect it. Some will, some won't. But you'll discover something crucial. Their reaction isn't your responsibility. Your boundary is your responsibility. Their feelings about your boundary are theirs to manage. Or it's midnight and you're alone and you're scrolling through old photos, old messages, old versions of your life. And there's this pull to reach out. To that person who made you feel small. To that situation you walked away from. To apologize for leaving, for changing, for choosing yourself. Your thumb hovers over their name. You can feel the old pattern trying to activate. The people-pleasing. The fear of being alone. The desperate hope that maybe this time it will be different. But then you remember why you left. You remember the feeling of being invisible in a crowded room. You remember the weight of pretending. You remember who you were becoming in that space. Smaller, quieter, more afraid. And you put the phone down. You sit with the discomfort. You feel the loneliness without running from it. And you survive it. You discover that being alone with yourself is infinitely better than being lonely with someone else. These are the small rebellions that nobody sees but you. These are the daily choices that don't make headlines, but absolutely transform your trajectory. These are the moments where you choose yourself over and over until choosing yourself becomes as natural as breathing. You want to know why they labeled you a threat? Because you stopped participating in your own diminishment. Because you stopped pretending that comfort was the same as fulfillment. Because you stopped waiting for permission to become who you already were underneath the layers of conditioning. They built an entire infrastructure around the assumption that everyone has a price, that everyone can be bought with the right combination of security and validation and belonging. The formula has always been simple. Make people afraid of losing what they have, then offer them just enough to keep them playing along. Keep them one paycheck away from panic. Keep them one rejection away from retreating. Keep them believing that the system is the only option. And then you showed up and proved that assumption wrong. Not by being perfect, not by having it all figured out, not by being fearless or invincible or immune to doubt, but by simply refusing to trade your authenticity for their approval, by choosing uncertainty with integrity over security without it, by betting on yourself when every statistic said you shouldn't, by walking away from what looked good to everyone else to pursue what felt right to you. You proved that freedom isn't something you find, it's something you claim. It's not a destination you arrive at. It's a decision you make every single day to prioritize truth over comfort, growth over safety, alignment over acceptance. That's the revolution they never saw coming. Because revolutions led by anger eventually burn out. The fuel runs out. People get tired. The rage that felt righteous becomes exhausting. Revolutions fueled by ego eventually collapse under the weight of their own contradiction. But revolutions rooted in self-respect, those are unstoppable. You're not rebelling for the sake of rebellion. You're not different for the sake of being different. You're aligned. You're awake. You're done fragmenting yourself into acceptable pieces for consumption. Every morning you wake up and choose yourself, you're sending shockwaves through a system designed to make you forget you had a choice. Every time you honor your boundaries, you're teaching people how to treat you and showing others it's possible to do the same. Every moment you refuse to shrink, you're giving permission to someone else who's watching, waiting, wondering if they're allowed to expand too. Because here's what happens when one person breaks free. They become proof that breaking free is possible. They become evidence that the cage was never as solid as it seemed. They become inspiration for everyone else who's been told they're asking for too much, expecting too much, being too much. Your liberation isn't just about you. It's contagious. It's revolutionary. It's permission granted to every person who witnesses it to question their own cages, their own compromises, their own resignation. You're not just living your life. You're modeling what's possible when someone decides their own approval is enough. When someone chooses to be the author of their story instead of a character in someone else's narrative. When someone realizes that the only validation that matters is the kind that comes from looking in the mirror and recognizing the person looking back. And that's dangerous. Not to you. Not to anyone genuinely invested in your well-being. It's dangerous to the narratives that keep people small, to the industries built on insecurity, to the systems that profit from your self-doubt, to the structures that depend on your compliance. You became a walking contradiction to the lie that you need to be fixed, improved, or upgraded before you're worthy of taking up space. You became proof that wholeness isn't something you achieve. It's something you remember. You became evidence that the power they've been selling you has been yours all along. So let them label you. Let them try to categorize you, analyze you, figure out your algorithm. Let them run their diagnostics and create their profiles and attempt to predict your next move. While they're busy trying to make sense of you, you'll be busy living. Actually living. Not performing life for an audience. Not curating a highlight reel. Not postponing joy until you hit some arbitrary milestone. Not waiting until you're thinner, richer, more accomplished, more acceptable. Living with your whole chest. Speaking with your real voice. Choosing based on what resonates with your soul, not what looks good on paper. Laughing at jokes only you think are funny. Pursuing interests people don't understand. Setting standards people call unrealistic. Drawing boundaries people call selfish. And somewhere in that authentic existence, you'll discover something beautiful. You don't need them to understand you. You don't need them to approve. You don't need them to validate your choices or co-sign your dreams or give you permission to exist exactly as you are. You just need you, your commitment to yourself, your willingness to keep showing up for the person in the mirror even when nobody else is watching, your courage to disappoint people whose expectations were never aligned with your purpose, your faith that the path you're carving is taking you somewhere worth going, even if you can't see the destination yet. And that self-reliance, that internal validation, that unshakable foundation built on your own truth, that's the real threat. Because if everyone realized they didn't need external permission to be themselves, entire industries would collapse. Marketing strategies built on manufactured inadequacy would fail. Power structures dependent on compliance would crumble. The social contracts that keep people contained would become obsolete. The whole game changes when people stop playing. And you stop playing. Not because you're arrogant, not because you're selfish, not because you think you're better than anyone else or have all the answers or never doubt yourself, but because you finally realized the game was rigged, the prize was fake, and you had something far more valuable waiting for you outside the arena. Your authentic life, the one you design, not inherit, the one that makes sense to you even if it confuses everyone else. The one where you get to be all of your contradictions at once, ambitious and content, strong and soft, certain and curious, serious and playful. Your real voice, not the polished, filtered, focus-grouped version. Not the voice that tells people what they want to hear. The voice that tells the truth, even when it shakes. The voice that asks questions nobody else is asking. The voice that says this isn't right for me, even when everyone else says it should be. Your unedited, unfiltered, unapologetic self. The version that exists when nobody's watching. The one with weird interests and unpopular opinions and quirks that don't fit any demographic. The one who laughs too loud or thinks too much or feels too deeply or dreams too big. That version has been waiting. Buried under expectations and adaptations and versions of yourself you created to survive. And now you're excavating. Now you're remembering. Now you're becoming. not becoming someone new. Becoming who you've been all along. You were never meant to be bought. You were meant to be untamed, uncharted, undeniably yours. So here's your challenge. What's one thing you've been apologizing for that actually deserves celebration? Drop it in the comments. Let's build a revolution of people who refuse to shrink.